Neighbor obviously has no credentials whatsoever to stake a claim for permanent membership of the Security Council.
In about a month from now, the whole world will be congregating at the United Nations in New York. And once again, there will be discussions of reforms at the United Nations Security Council, and Pakistan will be at the forefront. Joining me from New York today is Pakistan's permanent representative to the United Nations, Ambassador Asim Iftikhar Ahmad. We'll be talking to him about Pakistan's proposal for reforms at the United Nations and also talk to him about the veto system at the UNSC. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for doing this. Pakistan has been actively pushing for reforms in the United Nations, and Pakistan has also put forward a proposal in terms of the reforms at the UNSC, and it also has a policy towards the veto reforms. I wanted to ask you about Pakistan's policy, if you can explain what Pakistan's policy is vis-a-vis these reforms.
Thank you very much. I think it's an important discussion, and it's good that you took it up as a subject. Let me say at the outset that Security Council reform, or generally it's called an effort to expand the membership of the Security Council. This is a process that has been ongoing for many years now. And the most recent phase of this, in fact, itself goes back over 20 years. So it was 2005 when there was a strong push for expanding the Security Council. And there were three key proposals. One was from the Uniting for Consensus group that Pakistan belongs to, together with Italy and Canada, Turkey, Korea, Mexico, Argentina, and some of our other friends. There was another proposal by the G4, that is Germany, Japan, India, and Brazil. And the third proposal was from the African group. So this process of discussions has been ongoing since 2005, and in between there was a mechanism that was established that is called intergovernmental negotiations, which is called IGN, and it has been working since 2008. So this is slightly in terms of background. Now, why this is important, why it is important for Pakistan. So Security Council, as you know, is the principal organ of the United Nations that is entrusted with maintaining international peace and security. It is sometimes called the crown jewel of the UN system. And having a seat on the Security Council has its own significance. And you know that currently, under the Charter, there are 5 permanent members and 10 elected non-permanent members who come in for a 2-year term. And which is not immediately renewable. So that means you cannot contest for an immediate re-election against those 2-year seats. Now you can understand that, given the importance of the Security Council, given the significance of the decisions that are taken and the discussions that take place in the Security Council, having a seat on the council, how important that is. So that means that this is an issue on which member states, including Pakistan, have strategic interest. And that is something that has, made this process very difficult and complicated. So the main obstacle to expanding the Security Council has been this demand by certain members, a very few members, countries, who say that they want to have more permanent seats on the Security Council. That means to expand the Security Council in the permanent category, to add more permanent members in addition to the P5 that are already there. Why we say that this is not feasible? We have a very clear position that has been expressed over a period of years. And let me tell you briefly that it is a position that is based on principles. First of all, principle of sovereign equality, which is a principle of the UN Charter. We believe that all member states are equal members of this organization. There was a certain situation that existed in 1945, according to which the system was agreed that there were five permanent members. There was the Second World War and the victors and the losers. Now, 80 years later, the situation is different. And there is a general agreement among member states that the Security Council has to be more representative, more democratic, more accountable to the general membership. And we believe that that is possible only by including or adding new elected members to the Security Council that will make it more responsive to the general membership. And obviously, with elections and periodic, members coming in and going out, taking rotations, that corresponds more to the democratic system of accountability, transparency, and representation of the general membership. So, this is in principle the position of the Uniting for Consensus group to which Pakistan belongs. We are opposed in principle to any addition of new permanent members to the Security Council, but we are open to adding elected members that would be for specified duration. We are open to considering that these could be seats longer than the existing 2-year seats. So that means it could be 3-year to 4-year or 4 to 5 year seats, with also possibility for re-election. So that means that you will allocate new limited number of seats to the regional groups, and then member states that belong to those regional groups can seek election. Can, if they are elected, they sitting in the council for a specific number
But
of
Mr.
years.
Ambassador, one argument that can be presented by G4 is that currently you have 5 permanent members, and if you were to add 4 more members, it would lead to diversity and more democratization. And another argument regarding including 10 more elected members would be that we already have 10 elected members. Having 10 more wouldn't add much or wouldn't give more teeth to the Security Council. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, this is a very good question because it helps me explain. So now the argument that is made by the G4 and some of their supporters is that they would like to come in and pose themselves as competitors or counterparts to the existing P5. They are claiming that they will come in the council and they will be the counterweights to the existing permanent members. Now, that is very evident from the position that some of these countries have taken over a number of years. And it is very evident that they are not in a position and they are not going to be, in any case, in a position to act as a counterweight to the existing P5. In fact, if at all one or two or any of them are going to be accepted as members of the council, that will be possible only through some kind of compromise or bargain, which will further undermine any independent positions that they would have. And we know already that some of these, the members of the G4, how they are aligned in terms of their positions on various key issues of international peace and security. But more interesting than that is the general discussion and impression that member states and the members of the international community, including media, think tank, and civil society have, and you would have noticed this as well, that there has been a lot of criticism of the about the Security Council, that the council is often seen as in an impasse or as deadlocked. is not able to take decisions on key issues of international peace and security. Veto is unjustly used or abused. So you see situations like Ukraine, Gaza, Palestine, and other important issues. The Security Council is often blocked or deadlocked. And then the criticism that is directed towards the Security Council is basically towards the one or the other of the permanent members. So, what I'm trying to explain is that when the international community is very clear as to what is the problem in the Security Council, what causes this blockade, and what causes this impasse and inaction by the Security Council, it's clearly the positions of the permanent members and how they operate in the council and how they use their veto. So, if the problem is because of the permanent members, our argument is that it will be very disingenuous to suggest that while accepting that the problem is with the permanent members and the veto, that you say that we want to address this by adding new permanent members. So I think this is totally ununderstandable. This is not logical because if the council is deadlocked often because of the positions of five permanent members, you can imagine that it will be even more deadlocked. There will be more impasse in the council because if you have eight, nine, or 10 permanent members instead of the current five, then you will have to, take into account the individual interests and positions of 10, 11 permanent members. That will make the decision making even more difficult in the council. There will be less transparency, there will be less accountability. And the other point that you mentioned was also very important because currently you have five permanent members and 10 non-permanent members. So if you again acknowledge that the problem is because of the permanent members, then I think you have to give more weight and more influence to the elected or non-permanent members to counter and to be the counterweight to the permanent members. And that is possible under our formula, not under the G4 formula, which is only adding a few permanent seats. That will tilt the balance more in favor of the permanent members rather than the non-permanent members who are actually representing the rest of the UN membership. So our proposal, for example, the Uniting for Consensus proposal, is to add 10 elected members. So that means that you will have a council of 25. Currently, you have 15. So in the current council, you have five permanent and 10 non-permanent members. That is a ratio of 1 to 2. If you will have a council under the UFC formula, it will still have only five permanent members and 20 non-permanent members. So that means it will shift the balance heavily in favor of the elected members or the non-permanent members.
But Mr. Ambassador,
one to four.
one argument that can be given against this is that the most important bit at the Security Council, as you mentioned, is veto, which you said is used and abused. I want to quote an example. In June 2025, you were in the room. In fact, you were one of the backers for the ceasefire in Gaza, and that resolution was vetoed. So having 10 more members, that won't solve the veto problem. So what is Pakistan's proposal in terms of addressing the veto issue?
Yeah, that you rightly pointed out. Currently you have five vetoes. If you are going to have 10 vetoes, you are going to have more problems, not less problems.
Yeah.
And by the way, even by having five more veto wielding members does not address the issue as to the unjust or abuse of veto by any of the permanent members, because any member who has a veto can still use veto whenever they want. So there are two things that can be done. One is, there are various proposals, and this has been an ongoing discussion, that we try to limit the use of veto, and we try to add mechanisms through which there could be more accountability. So whoever uses veto, for example, go back to the General Assembly and have to explain their position as to how do they justify the use of veto. The other thing is that you try to say, and this was the French-Mexican proposal that which discourages current permanent members not to exercise veto in situations of war crimes and crimes against humanity. But this does not actually eventually solve the problem of the veto. What we are saying is very interesting. So the veto, if you look at it, veto is the power to block the adoption of decisions by the Security Council. It is not a power that lets you get your resolution adopted. For example, if a permanent member does not want or is not satisfied with the draft of resolution, it can block it by exercising its veto. But suppose the same permanent member has its own resolution that it has submitted before the Security Council. Solely because it has a veto power, it cannot have that resolution adopted by the Security Council because it will require at least nine affirmative votes, 9 of the 15, plus no veto by any permanent member. So veto is a undemocratic kind of a unilateral blocking power that the permanent members have. What we are suggesting is that if a group of countries who think that a resolution is not required, we do not want that resolution to be adopted because it does not serve the interests of international peace and security. They can still block that resolution, but not by an undemocratic veto, but by collective decision making. So, as I mentioned, that any resolution, in order to be adopted, requires 9 affirmative votes. So, 9 of the 15 in the current council. So, if you will have a council of 25, a reformed expanded council, with 20 elected members and 5 permanent members, with weightage very visibly on the side of the elected members, and you will have the bar for adopting a resolution at 15 or 16 affirmative votes required, in the new council. So that means that any resolution, for example, which is not liked by the African group or by Asia or Latin America, general by developing countries, you can come together. The elected members can have consultations, they can come together and deny, those 15, 16 affirmative votes that are required to pass a resolution. So you can still block a resolution that is undesirable, but not by one country using the veto, but by, currently 9, and in an expanded council, 15 or 16, who will not support that resolution, and thus leading to non-adoption of that resolution. This is, in our view, a better way of addressing the blocking power of the veto. It will still be a blocking power, but it will not be used by one member standalone, while the 14 are in favor, but it will be a majority blocking with the majority of the member states, members of the Security Council, coming together and rallying around this convergence that resolution is not desirable and we need not adopt it. So they will not support it.
There's another contour to this. So, for example, when there are four countries, as you would say, G4, and they would want to become permanent members, that would also mean that one has to look at their own compliance track record. If a specific country has been compliant of United Nations Security Council, then I think it makes sense that they should be admitted to the group. But if a certain country's own track record is faulty, or they haven't complied with UNSC resolutions for decades, then should that country be elected to P5 or this Security Council uh, permanent membership framework?
Yes, there is that scrutiny that is there, and we believe that there are several countries, including our neighbor, obviously, it has and no credentials whatsoever to even stake a claim for permanent membership of the Security Council. But what I am trying to say is that our opposition, our position is irrespective of this, and it is based on principle, and that is of sovereign equality. And that is why we have said that the demand for new permanent seats, it is actually something that is blocking reform. It has not led us to make progress because this is not feasible. The existing permanent members are not ready to share their power of veto, and they are actually not also ready to have new permanent members that will sit on equal footing. So what we are suggesting is that in line with the generally agreed principles of more accountable, democratic, and representative Security Council, that we should add new elected non-permanent seats. And for that, we have also proposed that these seats, not just the existing 2-year configuration that is available in the charter, we can consider longer term seats, just like we have the 3-year seats in the Human Rights Council or the Economic and Social Council. So we can have 3 to 4 year or 4 to 5 year seat that will enable a larger set of countries to contribute to the work of the Security Council, rather than having a fixed kind of model that will remain fixated in time, that will not be responsive to the changing realities of the international system. So let me tell you, if you would have followed the discussions during the current session of the General Assembly in the intergovernmental negotiations, and you know that there are two co-facilitators who lead this process. They have, during this session, they have made some interesting observations and conclusions. I mean, though in their personal capacity, they conclude one thing. One, the main thing was that the demand for new permanent seats seems not realizable. It's not feasible. And they have therefore proposed that as part of a reform model of the Security Council, member states may wish to consider fixed longer term regional seats. So this is something that the co-facilitators have presented, realizing that 20 years plus discussion has not led us to anywhere near a reform model that is acceptable to everyone. That the only way to make progress is that all sides, all stakeholders make compromises. They move a bit from their original positions, and they try to see where they can meet, at a common meeting point, which will lead to a final decision about the reform. And their own finding is that this is possible through fixed regional seats. And they have proposed that this idea can be elaborated through further discussions. What they are suggesting is that medium-term seats like 4-year, 5-year, whatever, can be discussed. There could be possibilities of re-election, and this model can be further. This idea can be further discussed among member states to see on what eventually on what parameters can you reach an agreement, so that there is consensus finally,
Yeah,
and
I think the
you move
consensus
ahead.
is on the fact that status quo cannot go on and some substantive reforms need to be taken. Ambassador Asim Iftikhar, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.